At the very beginning of the human species, people moved in tiny groups, maybe 8, maybe 10 people. They were hunter-gatherers. They comprised usually a family unit or a clannish unit. Bigger groups were unheard of, and when groups came across each other, conflict usually erupted over territory and hunting rights. And so empathy, the way we understand it today, was not very useful at that time because people didn't come across many other people. They did not come across strangers. They knew each other well. They became one, a single organism, part of which hunted, the other part gathered and reared children. People didn't need to empathize with each other because the level of familiarity was so deep, so profound, that one knew others in the group as one knew oneself. And yet empathy did emerge during the hunter-gatherer phase of humanity. Empathy for the prey, empathy for the animals being hunted. And this is the topic of today's video, the predatory roots of empathy. My name is Sam Vaknin. I am the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited, and I'm a professor of psychology. Before we start, before we go there, I would like to read to you something. Camila posted a comment on YouTube, one of the videos, and here is what she had to say. Hi Sam, because you are speaking of the many metaphors and analogies you have developed to communicate the complex and mystifying world of the narcissist, I wanted to share with you one of my own. I conceptualize the narcissist as a wonderfully talented ice sculptor who keeps within the walk-in freezer of his mind a fantastic ice sculpture, his highest accomplishment, his grandiose false self-concept. The key to keeping the ice sculpture in its perfectly preserved condition is, of course, the freon, which for the narcissist is his narcissistic supply. And because the artist loves his creation and depends on it to garner the admiration and affection of his adoring fans, the artist's main occupation in life is guarding, monitoring, and obtaining a never-ending supply of freon. And if the freon runs low, a frantic search for a new source of freon becomes the main preoccupation of the artist. And if the freon does run low and the sculpture is ruined, this is narcissistic mortification. I can and do go further in my own mind with this analogy. It suits the way I conceive of the narcissist. But you get the gist. Yes, I do. Thank you for this vivid imagery of the inner recesses of the narcissist's mind. And so I mentioned that early hunter-gatherers moved in tiny groups. These were basically the equivalent of extended nuclear families. Everyone knew everyone profoundly. Everyone shared everyone's life. It was a single organism with multiple extensions. There was no real need for empathy. Empathy is about decoding the mind of the other, mainly strangers. And so people did empathize, but they empathize mostly with prey, with the animals they were hunting. Now, of course, there was empathy between the members of the group, the members of the in-group, the members of the hunter-gatherer extended clan. Of course, there was empathy. I'm not denying this. And of course, we do empathize with meaningful, significant people in our lives, people we love, even people we hate. But at that period, after a certain point in time, empathy was replaced with familiarity, the ability to predict another person's thoughts, emotions, and resultant behavior. And so empathy, the resources of empathy, were dedicated to deciphering the animal, to putting yourself within the animal's skin and fur in order to anticipate the next moves of the animal. Any hunter, to this very day, any hunter would tell you that there is a process of empathizing with the animal being hunted. There is a process of becoming one with that animal. There's a process of putting yourself as a hunter in the hoofs or the claws of the animal, so that you can predict the future behavior of the animal and be there waiting for it to appear and to be hunted down. So people were empathizing with the prey. People were predators. During the hunter-gatherer phase of humanity, all people were predators. And this process of empathizing with the prey in a collective empathizing, allowed for coordination and for in-group bonding. I claim that empathy emerged during hunting. Empathy is a hunting artifact. People empathize with the animal, and because everyone in the hunting posse or the hunting group, everyone empathized with the animal simultaneously and similarly, if not identically, this created a common denominator between people and allowed them to coalesce and to cohere into groups. The hunting foray became the hunting collective. And the hunting collective gave rise to a collective hive mind, which is a prerequisite for what we call the intersubjective space, a prerequisite for empathy. I'm mentioning all this, that empathy emerged from hunting, which is a distinctly non-empathic or dysempathic activity, and that empathy was focused on the prey rather than on other people, because that's precisely what is happening with narcissists and psychopaths. Before we proceed, allow me to read to you a paragraph from Andrew Marr's A History of the World, an amazing book, by the way. There's an eponymous BBC series titled The History of the World with Andrew Marr. Anyhow, he says in the book that hunters fused mentally with the animals they were hunting. Let me read it to you. Andrew Marr says, "We also know that later agricultural societies worship deities associated with their survival, gods for rain, water, sun, corn. So it seems likely that hunter-gatherer societies gave a special place to the aspects of nature they relied on most heavily, the animals they killed and the animals they used. Today's hunter-gatherers tend to show reverence for and close observatory interest in the birds and animals they live off. African hunters are known to mimic animals they intend to pursue, to try to get inside their thinking. Surely the cave paintings of various animals have a similar origin." So this is what Andrew Marr has to say based on multiple studies that he cites in his book, that there was some mimicry involved. The hunter became the animal, at least for a while. In order to gain access to the animal's mind, the hunter became the animal. The hunter transformed himself into the animal he was hunting. It's the ultimate form, the most unadulterated form of empathy. Narcissists and psychopaths do exactly the same. They regard other people as prey, the way the hunter regards his quarry, the animals he's hunting. Especially psychopaths, but definitely also narcissists, regard other people as tools, extensions, instruments to be used, and they hunt these people. Hunting is a crucial feature of pathological narcissism and psychopathy. And in the process of hunting, the narcissist and the psychopath deploy a skill, if you wish, the skill of cold empathy. Cold like brr. Cold empathy is a phrase I coined to describe the amalgamation of reflexive and cognitive empathy, but with the absence of an affective component. There are no emotions involved. When the psychopath and the narcissist empathize with other people, they resonate with them. They decode and decipher them and understand them and comprehend them and grok them fully. They put themselves inside the skins and shoes of other people to perfection, even more than healthy and normal people. And yet none of this produces in the narcissist or in the psychopath an emotional resonance, a reaction. There is no emotional identification with the other person. Cold empathy is therefore indeed cold. And people are perceived, as I said, as a kind of prey, whereas the narcissist and psychopath are instinctively or reflexively predatory. How does the narcissist, how does the psychopath, how do they succeed to empathize with people? How does the hunter succeed to empathize with his quarry, his prey, the animal he's hunting? There are vast differences between the hunter and the animal. There's an enormous gap or abyss between the narcissist and psychopath and healthy, normal people whom they're hunting. The narcissist's prey, the psychopath's victim, target, or mark, they're usually very, very different psychologically and psychodynamically to the narcissist and the psychopath. They're like two different species. How is empathy possible at all, even cold empathy, in the hunting process? Whether you're hunting an animal or whether you're hunting a human being, how in principle is such empathy possible? There are four pillars, four foundations that allow such empathy to emerge. Number one, a common background. In classic hunting, both the human hunter and the animal being hunted share many things. They share the feeling or the emotion of fear. They share the same physical environment. They come to mimic each other, especially the hunter mimics the animal. So there's a lot in common. Similarly, narcissists and psychopaths, especially narcissists, have a lot in common with their victims. They usually have a common background of, for example, a dysfunctional family or adverse childhood experiences or trauma and abuse in early childhood. Both the victims of narcissists and narcissists come from relatively similar or even identical familial backgrounds. And so they know each other intimately. The intimacy between the hunter and the animal, the intimacy between the narcissist and his victim, the intimacy between the psychopath and his mark, intimacy between predator and prey, the intimacy between the serial killer and his victims. This type of intimacy is the most extreme, the most intense, the most profound, the most all-pervasive. Nothing comes close to it. And it is founded on these commonalities, of background, of environment, and of affect. Number two, we're now talking about the psychological processes and constructs that give rise to cold empathy. Despite the differences between hunter and hunted, there are commonalities that give rise, or foundations that give rise to the possibility of empathy between them, however limited, however non-affective, non-emotional. So the second pillar is nuanced hypervigilance. The hunter, the psychopath, the narcissist, they're attuned to the slightest subtleties, the most flattering nuances in body language, facial expressions, in micro expressions, in language. They are attuned. The attunement is enormous. It borders on hypervigilance. The narcissist and the psychopath and the hunter, they scan the prey, they scan the hunted animal, they scan the quarry, they scan the mark or the target or the victim. And the scanning is super detailed, extremely penetrating. It is ubiquitous, covers everything, all encompassing, all engulfing, and the attention paid is inordinate, is extreme, attentional focus in the screening process. That's why victims describe a feeling of laser, like a laser gaze or a laser look that kind of paralyzes them, the way animals would be paralyzed in the headlights, confronted with headlights of an oncoming car. So this attentional focus, coupled with the nuanced hypervigilance, leads to the mapping of the victim, to the creation of a representation of the victim that captures all the vulnerabilities, all the weaknesses, all the access points, all the penetration vectors, everything which lends itself to the capturing of the victim, acquisition of the victim, and leveraging or using the victim, abusing the victim. And finally, the victim and the hunter, the victim, the prey and the predator, the victim and the narcissist, the victim and the psychopath, they share a kind of fantasy. The fantasy could be shared, or the fantasy could be merely cathected. For example, when the psychopath presents to his mark or to his target a fantasy, the psychopath is fully aware that it's a fantasy. The psychopath's reality testing is intact. The psychopath knows the difference between reality and fantasy. But the psychopath is emotionally invested in the fantasy because he regards the fantasy as the vehicle through which he is going to accomplish his goals. So, whether the fantasy is shared with the victim, or whether the fantasy is imbued with extremely intense emotions and cravings and even aggression, the fantasy is always there. Even between the hunter and the animal, there is an interplay, a delicate interplay, which is narrative in nature, which is essentially a kind of fantasy. And if you want to get deeper, to delve deeper into this, I would advise you to read the book Moby Dick, which is essentially the chronicle and the intimate profiling of a hunting expedition for a huge whale. So the hunter and the animal, they bond. There's a type of bonding, a type of attachment, which is narrative bonding, narrative attachment. It's about a story. There's a story unfolding. Everyone has a role in this story. It's the same with the narcissist and his intimate partner, the narcissist and his source of supply, the psychopath and his victim or mark or target. In all these situations, everyone is embedded in, to some extent, reifies and fantastic space within which a narrative, a fictional narrative in many ways, unfolds. There is intimacy between the hunter and the animal. There's a kind of attachment, there's a kind of bonding. There's binding, they're bound together. And they develop this intimate relationship where the animal becomes the reason for the hunter's existence. The animal represents the hunter's life, whereas the hunter represents the animal's death. Life and death, the most profound foundations and pillars of existence, the forces that drive the universe, not only according to Freud. So This is the role play, if you wish, which underlies the whole thing. But empathy is clearly associated with a hunting process, clearly emerges from the predator-prey interactive space. And as such, empathy has predatory aspects. For example, even in classical, warm, healthy, normal empathy between two people, there is a kind of appropriation of the other person, kind of annexation of the other person, kind of digestion of the other person. Empathy always takes over the other person. When you empathize with someone, you are subsuming them, you are swallowing them, you're digesting them, you're experiencing them through your own mind. And in this way, you are denying them a separate existence. And this, I think, is an excellent encapsulation and description of what hunting is all about.